I'm Becca, and this is Deadly Truths, where history, horror, and humanity collide. Every episode, we go beyond the headlines into the hidden corners of American violence, the soldiers, the murderers, the martyrs, and the ghosts that history tried to forget. Some of these stories are old, some are still unfolding, but they all ask the same question: what drives ordinary people to cross the line between duty and destruction? This is Deadly Truths. Before we begin, content warning. The episode includes discussion of combat trauma, PTSD, moral injury, and suicide within the military. If you're a veteran or active duty service member and anything in this story hits too close to home, please don't carry it alone. You can call or text 988 and press 1 to reach the Veterans Crisis Line or chat online at veteranscrisisline.net. If you are active duty, you can also reach Military One Source 24/7 at 1-800-342-9647 or talk to your chaplain, behavioral health team, or command. Getting help is not a weakness. It's the same courage you showed when you put on that uniform. You are not alone, and your story isn't over. On October 27th of 1995, it was a Friday. Dawn is sliding across the pines at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the home of the 82nd Airborne Division. Hundreds of paratroopers stand in formation for morning PT. Cadence echoes through the fog, boots hit the asphalt in rhythm, and then crack, then another and another. At first, they think it's blanks, a drill, some lieutenant showing off, but the noise doesn't stop, and then neither do the screams. Major Stephen Badger is hit. 18 others go down. The shooter isn't an intruder. It's one of their own. Sergeant William J. Kreutzer Jr., 26 years old. Not the Hollywood soldier, more the awkward, brooding kind. He joined the Army in 1992, got assigned to the 325th Airborne Infantry, deployed to Egypt with a UN peacekeeping unit. But long before Fort Bragg ever heard his name, something was already off. Army records later showed that from early on, he had talked about killing. He had a fixation not on combat, but on death itself. His peers joked. They called him Crazy Kreutzer. In a culture built on bravado, the weird guy with dark thoughts was either entertainment or invisible. Summer of 1994 in the Egyptian desert, Kreutzer is standing guard under a sun that could bake your bones, and he cracks. He starts crying, talking about killing people in his unit, about suicide, about having a plan. He's taken to the division's mental health officer, Dr. Darren Fong. Fong reports say Kreutzer has anger and poor coping skills. He's got interpersonal problems, but, and here's the kicker, Fong rules he's not a danger to himself or others. So no psychiatric referral, no treatment plan, only a note in his file. His weapon gets taken for 2 weeks. That's the Army's version of therapy in the mid-90s. It was basically a timeout. Back at Bragg, he's still quiet. He's still awkward. The teasing doesn't stop. If anything, it ramps up. They start calling him Wild Bill, along with Crazy Kreutzer. He tries to laugh it off, but his confidence, whatever's left of it, it evaporates. He screws up equipment inspections, loses an M60 barrel, cries in front of his squad. In a world where crying is basically a war crime, that is social suicide. All the signs were there that he was having a mental break. He tells a few people he's not doing well. He tries to reach a chaplain and a counselor that October, but no one calls him back. You can almost feel the slow motion impulsion starting. A man with a history of threats, a mental health record, and now he has his M16, and he can't get his call returned. On October 26th of 1995, Kreutzer checks into a cheap motel room outside Fayetteville. He lays out his gear on the bed like a ritual. Ammunition, magazines, a scope. He calls a friend, Specialist Burl Mays and says he's going to open fire on the formation tomorrow. Mays takes him seriously and runs to his platoon leader. The response? Laughter. They call Mays a pussy and tell him to lighten up. That's how warning signs die in the Army. I don't mean to laugh here, but just growing up in the military, being in the military myself, my husband being in the military, my brothers, I come from a long line of military. I'm not baffled by this at all. I would like to be, but I'm not. So they say, hey, don't be a pussy, lighten up. He's not actually going to do anything. Sometime after midnight, Kreutzer writes a note and packs his car. He says later he expected to be killed in return, not to escape, not to prove a point, but to end everything loudly. So we've got 6:30 a.m. on the clock. The formation assembles. Hundreds of paratroopers lined up for the daily run. And by the way, a little tidbit here. This is around the time that my husband was stationed there, was a paratrooper. He's actually the one who told me to do this story. I had not heard about this, which is kind of funny because I was in the Navy during the same time that this happened. But obviously, it was pretty close to home for my husband. So here we are, guys. Back to the story. You can picture it. From the tree line, a shadow takes a knee and shoulders his rifle. He fires more than 100 rounds into the crowd. Some soldiers think it is a training exercise until the first body drops. The field erupts in panic. Men dive for cover. Others run for injured friends. Within minutes, Major Stephen Badger is dead. 18 others are wounded. And through it all, Kreutzer just keeps firing. Methodical, focused, until he's tackled by a fellow paratrooper who flanked through the bleachers. Thank goodness for that guy, by the way. I couldn't find out who it was, but kudos to that dude. The rifle hits the ground. Kreutzer doesn't resist. He just whispers, I didn't mean for it to go like this. That's the million-dollar question, right? What was wrong with this guy? Here's what the record shows and what it doesn't. He was not a anti-army terrorist. He was a guy with really low self-esteem. He did have anger issues and a history of violent fantasies who lived in a culture that mocked any sign of weakness. He had asked for help before. He had been seen crying in his uniform, and he'd been evaluated and dismissed. I hate to say the whole bit about he'd been seen crying in his uniform, but that had happened more than once. And unlike a lot of us who cry in the shower or, go back to our barracks and cry alone, he was actually crying in front of people. So that is an enormous, huge red flag. By the time he fired those shots, he was living inside a perfect storm of shame, loneliness, and delusion, a pressure cooker that no one wanted to open. After the attack described him as profoundly depressed, paranoid, and in extreme psychic distress. One doctor said she'd never seen a mind so fractured and still functioning enough to pull a trigger. If you boil it down, this was the collision of two forces. One man's unraveling and an institution's inability to see it coming, or maybe their refusal to see it coming. Because in 1995 in the Army, mental health was not something you treated. It was something you survived quietly, or you didn't. But the important part was you kept your mouth shut, and you did not complain, and you definitely didn't cry. Kreutzer was tried at Fort Bragg in 1996. The first peacetime death penalty case for a soldier since Vietnam. The prosecution called him a cold-blooded killer who planned an ambush on his own brothers. The defense argued he was mentally ill. Clearly, the Army had failed. A walking case study in neglect. He was found guilty of premeditated murder and 18 counts of attempted murder, sentenced to death by lethal injection. But that verdict didn't last. In 2004, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces overturned his death sentence, citing ineffective counsel and ignored mental health evidence. By 2009, he was resentenced to life without parole. We had one young lady who, every time the petty officer came up to her and got close to her face and started to yell at her, she would pass out. Now, you would think that they would remove her and not allow her to graduate from boot camp. But guess what? She did. And she was a gunner's mate, which makes me laugh in the worst of ways. And if you're wondering what a petty officer is, it's the Navy's version of a drill sergeant, just not as scary. Today, Sergeant William J. Kreutzer Jr. is an inmate at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. His world is the same cold walls that have held every kind of American soldier who lost control, from deserters to war criminals to men who turned their guns inward. He'll die there. Kreutzer's story isn't about one bad apple. It's about what happens when an entire system decides it's easier not to look. The Army was told he was dangerous. It was warned in writing. It chose to believe he was just another weird guy with an attitude problem. And when the bullets start flying, they paid for the denial in blood. We like to think discipline is the glue that keeps the military together, but discipline without empathy is just a different kind of blindness. If you grew up in the 90s, you remember that era when everyone thought therapy was for other people and tough it out was basically a religion. Kreutzer was a product of that world, the soldier version of it. But when the cracks showed, instead of patching them, the Army just painted over them with olive drab. This was 1995. No one was talking about suicidal ideation. That language didn't exist yet. So he spoke in the only language that he knew. That language was violence, and everyone heard him too late. I want to take a moment, as usual, to talk about the victim. He was 38 years old, an intelligence officer with the 82nd Airborne Division. Badger had spent his career trying to make sense of chaos, to see patterns in the world's darkest corners. His name was Major Stephen Mark Badger. He was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and went on to study psychology at Brigham Young University. That background says something. He didn't just want to fight wars, he wanted to understand the people who fought them. He lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina with his wife and his children. Friends said he was the kind of man who dreamed big, to climb every mountain in the world and ski the ones he didn't climb. He loved to read and play the guitar. That morning, when the first shots cracked through the trees, Major Badger didn't run. He ran towards the danger. Witnesses said he tried to warn his men, to get them down, to get them safe. When he was struck, he was killed instantly. For his actions, Major Badger was awarded the Soldier's Medal, one of the highest honors a soldier can earn in peacetime, given for heroism that saves others. His body now rests in his hometown, but his name lives on across the 82nd Airborne community and in every soldier who still walks that field. 18 others were wounded that day. Men like CW2 Abram Castillo, who was paralyzed from the waist down, and Major Guy Lofero, who spent weeks in a coma after being shot in the stomach. And a few, including Captain Cole Bricker and Lieutenant George Lewis, risked their own lives to flank the gunman and wrestle the weapon from his hands. These are the names that should be remembered, the ones who stood in the line of fire, not the one who pulled the trigger. Major Stephen Mark Badger, age 38, soldier, husband, father, climber, and skier of mountains. October 27, 1995, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You are not forgotten. If you served or are still serving and something in this story hit too close to home, please don't try to carry it alone. Help is out there, and it is not a weakness. It's survival. If you're a veteran, you can call and text 988 and press 1 to reach the Veterans Crisis Line. You can also chat online at veteranscrisisline.net. If you are active duty, you can call 988, reach out to your Military One Source counselor at 1-800-342-9647. Talk to a chaplain, behavioral health office, or your chain of command. These are people who understand, people who have been there. You are not alone. You are not broken. And the world is still better with you in it. You have been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. If you found the story compelling, follow, rate, and share on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you're listening. It helps keep the stories going. Sources for this episode include the New York Times, the Army Law Review, U.S. Court of Appeals, and the Armed Forces Records, and official Department of Defense reports. Deadly Truth is written and produced independently. And remember, the past isn't dead, it's just doing time in Leavenworth.